everybody, it's Lori again, and welcome back to my kitchen. I'm coming to you today with another one of those controversial canner subjects. And what I would like to share with you today is how I can bacon. Now, that is a controversial subject because some people say bacon is too fatty. You can't safely can that. Other people say bacon is cured. You can't safely can that. Well, I kind of disagree with both of them. I have been canning bacon and ham, which is cured, both bacon and ham in my home for years now without any issues at all of spoiling on the shelf due to the fat content or any other issues, to be quite frank. I've had both of those types of meat canned and on the shelves for 3 to 5 years at a time, shelf life, and had no issues. So today, my disclaimer is that this isn't necessarily an approved canning item or project, but if you are like me and you want to make things shelf stable and try to get away from your reliance on the freezer and the power grid, this might be something that you would be interested in. So I'll walk you through what I do, and it actually is very, very simple, okay? So I'm going to page down here onto my work area. I'm sorry, I have something dinging at me in the background. First of all, I bake my bacon to try to drain off quite a bit of the grease from the bacon, okay? Now this isn't something that you're draining. You're trying to remove all of the fat content, but I do remove as much as I can in the baking process. So I have just my store-bought bacon, and bacon, you know, is a lot easier to work with when it's defrosted but still cold. You know, if you allow bacon to get warm, it gets kind of floppy and sticky, and it's really hard to work with. I want to make sure before I touch this that I'm paged up where you can see what I'm doing. All right, there we go. And I do apologize for all that noise in the background, that ding, ding, ding. All right, so what I do is I take my bacon and I simply have a tinfoil lined baking tray with edges on it. And I just put the tinfoil on there just to make cleanup a little bit easier for myself. And so then what I do is I just lay this out on the baking tray. And I've just figured out that this is a little easier way to do it than trying to separate them all in your hand and laying them down one by one. So this is just how I do my bacon. Just, you know, in case you haven't ever, you know, developed your own easy, quick method of doing it. And you can pan fry this to remove some of the grease also if you would like to. That's absolutely fine. I just find it a lot easier just to do in the oven. I bake these at 425 for approximately 10 or 15 minutes. I try to get them cooked but still pliable, so I do not bake them to the crisp stage when I am canning my bacon. I just do it so that most of the fat has been rendered off on my baking sheet, and the bacon is still flexible. Now I'm just going to make sure that all of my little ends are in here on the pan so that I don't have grease dripping into my oven. All right, so my bacon is laid out, and all I'm doing is I'm going to stick it into my 425 degree oven for approximately 10 or 15 minutes. That's still hot from the last batch. I better get a glove on. All right, and I will set my timer for 10 minutes, and then I will check it, and if I feel like it needs just a few more minutes, I'll set it for another 5 minutes. But I never turn these at all. I just stick them in and I let them cook as they are. There's no flipping, there's no monitoring, nothing. Just 425 for 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, guys, so I've removed my bacon now from the oven, and you can see that I kind of bake it so that it's a little bit brown on the edges, but this is still very, very flexible, okay? So now all I do, I've got an old towel laid out on my countertop, And then I have a layer of a bunch of paper towels. And then I put on top of that, I put parchment paper. So all I do now is I just take my bacon from my tray and kind of let it drip and get a little bit more of that, that good bacon grease off of there. And then I just lay it out on the parchment lined paper, or the parchment paper, to cool for just a few minutes. So let it drip. As you can see, you know, all that good fat is dripping off. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this drain a little bit more on the parchment paper and just cool to the point where I can work with it. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be hot. It doesn't have to be ice cold. Just where you can touch it and work with it. So there we go. We have our bacon removed from our pan. Now, I save my bacon grease, guys, for all sorts of frying. You know, I'll fry eggs in this and potatoes in this. Bacon grease is an amazing thing in the kitchen, as long as you do not have dietary restrictions that say that you cannot have, you know, so much fat in your diet. So what I do now is I've got a good corner on my pan that is lined completely with the tin foil. Now when you're first pouring hot bacon grease into a jar, you want to just drip that in there and let that jar get acclimated to the heat. You know, grease is like molten lava. It is so hot. So when you're first starting your jar, you need to be really careful and slowly pour your bacon grease in. But after you've got a little bit in your jar, then all I do is just pour my grease in, and every batch that I bake in the oven, I just continue to add that grease to that jar. And now I'm going to return my pan over to the oven, and I'm going to do another package of bacon in the oven. So while this cools, I'll get another pan going. And like I said, this is good stuff for frying and cooking of all sorts. And the other reason why I really like doing bacon this way, you know, some people do raw pack it, but what that does is if you raw pack your bacon without the parchment paper, which I'm going to show you in a minute, if you raw pack your bacon, what you end up with is this mass of cooked meat and fat all in your jar. It's just a great big solid mass. I like to extract that bacon grease off because then I have it all in one place so that I can use it for cooking and baking. When you're raw packing bacon, you have in each jar, you have a certain amount of bacon grease in each jar that of course renders out as you're canning your bacon. But that means all of your bacon grease is in 15, 20, 30, 45 jars. This way, if you cook your bacon or bake your bacon in the oven first, you can concentrate all of that bacon grease into one place. Now, you're still going to have a little bit of grease in each jar, but it's not going to be the huge amount like if you would raw pack it. So, as these cool a little bit, I'm going to go back over to the stove or oven, and I'm going to get another package of bacon baking in the oven, and then we'll be back in just a minute. All right, guys, so I came back here for a second because I want to show you something. This is a store-bought package of bacon, and you know, normally we talk about bacon as I bought a pound of bacon. Well, quite honestly, these days, you guys, you're no longer buying a pound of bacon. You are given 12 ounces of bacon, which isn't a pound. A pound is 16 ounces. So in each one of these packages of bacon that I'm doing today, there's only 12 ounces. And so when I am canning my bacon, I want a pound of bacon in each one of my pint jars. I can a package and a half of bacon, of these 12 ounce packages of bacon, okay? They don't even, I don't know, they just don't sell pounds of bacon anymore. They're, you know, giving you less ounces for more money these days. But anyway, you check your package, but my packages are now only 12 ounces of bacon. And so I'm going to take a package and a half for each pint jar that I do. But I just wanted to stop and I wanted to tell you that because that's kind of important information. Okay, now I'm going to get stuff in the oven and I will be back soon. All right, guys, so I moved that bacon that you saw after it cooled. I moved that onto a clean piece of parchment paper. And now I have a second package cooked up. Now the reason why I brought up that 12-ounce package thing, you know, as I showed you on the camera, they're no longer giving us a pound of bacon. They're mostly giving us 12 ounces. And this is what happens when, and I'll show you how to do this in a minute, but this is what happens when you put the 12 ounces into a wide mouth pint jar. Look at all this real estate space that you're missing in your jar. This jar is not packed tightly at all. This is 12 ounces of bacon, and it has kind of unrolled at this point in time. And so if I roll it back up as tight as I had it when I first put it in the jar, look at all that wasted space. All right, so I want to make sure that I at least have a pound of bacon in each one of my wide mouth pint jars. And yes, I can these in wide mouth pint jars. It's easier to get in, it's easier to get out. So I'll show you how I do that. Now we have that original 12-ounce package of bacon. I've cooked up another 12-ounce package of bacon, of which I'm going to take half of it, which is 6 ounces. Yes, I know that a pound is, 16 ounces, and so 6 ounces is a little bit more than the extra that you need, but it's not going to cause you any problems. I got to grab something to wipe my hands here with. So I have 12 ounces plus 6 ounces from a secondary package. And all I'm going to do at this point in time is, as you can see, lay them end for end. And I like to pack them so that I can kind of fold over this one end. And what you're going to do is it's almost going to be like you're building a burrito here in a way. And I will say again, what I am using is parchment paper. This is not wax paper. This is not freezer paper. Both of them have wax on it. You want parchment paper, okay? No other substitutions, parchment paper. And so what I do is I fold in the ends and I kind of get them creased with my hands so that it will kind of work with me as I'm rolling it up. So I hold those ends in and I fold my parchment paper over my pile of bacon. Now, another thing that I want you to remember is that your pint jar is only so tall. Make sure that you are making these bundles so that they are not taller than your jar, okay? Head space in this particular project does not matter, but you don't want to be pressing up on the lid. So I always try to fold it so that it leaves me right underneath that screw-on band area, okay? Right to the lip of the jar. I try to make it about that tall. So keeping all those things in mind, then I just very tightly fold over my bacon, just like what you would do if you are wrapping a burrito up, using a tortilla, okay? And then I like to have my folded edge. I like to have that on the inside just because it makes a neater appearance in the jar. Not that it really matters. It's just one of my OCD things. Take the end of that package and just start rolling it up tight, just like what you would do with like a rug or a towel, okay? Keeping that raw edge folded in nice and tight, okay? Now, as you can see, my bacon is still flexible, okay? I have rendered a lot of fat out of my bacon, but it's not crispy. It's still bendy and flexible, all right? And that's how you can roll this up so easily. So you just roll it into this beautiful, tight, little parchment paper package, And then you take your wide mouth pint jar and put it right in there. Look at that, guys. That is a thing of beauty, okay? So if you are using only the 12 ounces, you have wasted space in your jar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unroll this 12-ounce package. I just did this as an example for you. I'm going to unroll that, and I'm going to add more bacon, half of the package of the other package of bacon. I'm going to add that in there. You can see some of it got a little overcooked and it's a little crispy. That's okay. You know, crispy bacon, soft bacon, whatever, it's bacon. So wrap up your ends, turn it to the side tightly. And then roll it up like a rug or a towel or whatever you want to say. Hopefully that's not in the way. So now I am guaranteed a pound of bacon in my wide mouth pint jar. And it fits like a dream. Beautiful. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to finish cooking or baking and wrapping up and getting things put into my jars, and then I will come back and I'll tell you the rest. All right, guys, so I got my next package of bacon is in the oven, and while that's baking, I want to show you on this parchment paper where I lay my bacon to cool. Hopefully, I know my lighting here on the island is not very good, but hopefully you can see it. Parchment paper is amazing. Where you lay your bacon out to drain and cool, you can take just a spatula, okay, and just scrape all of that bacon grease up into a corner. Can you see how it's pooling there? Look at all this beautiful bacon grease. I'm going to turn it and see if I can't. I don't know where the lighting is going in my house sometimes. Here, there, maybe you can see it. All right, I've scraped, and look at this beautiful little puddle of bacon grease. You guys, I don't want to waste that, and I don't want to keep adding to it either, because if I lay more cooked bacon on here, they're just going in a pile of grease, and they're not really draining well. So I just scrape that right up into a nice little area, and I take my bacon grease jar and pour it in. Just pour it right in there. I want every last luscious, wonderful drop of bacon grease to fry eggs and potatoes and whatever my heart's desire is. So that's another really wonderful thing about the parchment paper, and that is why I do not drain my bacon directly on the paper towels. The paper towels are more of a safety guard to safeguard my my actual bath towel. I don't want all that bacon grease just soaked up on these towels that I'm going to throw away. I suppose you could use them as fire starters in your wood stove, but I want to save as much as of that bacon grease as I can. And so this is how I do it. And I just scrape it all up into the corner. While it's still fluid, I just drain it into my bacon grease jar. All right, I'm going to continue baking bacon and draining off the grease and saving that. And I will be back in just a little bit. All right, guys, so before I start the canning process, I just wanted to come back and I wanted to show you that now I have 5 pounds of bacon in 5 pint jars. A pint's a pound the world around, and I made sure to put in a pound of uncooked or raw bacon per jar, okay? And in baking it in the oven and draining that bacon grease off, I have an entire quart jar full of wonderful bacon grease for frying eggs or potatoes, or for even smearing inside of Oh, my muffin tin, if I'm going to make cornmeal muffins. You guys know how to use bacon grease. Bacon grease is just amazing in the kitchen. But I thought it was actually pretty stunning. I've never stopped myself when I'm doing this process to kind of do the math about how much grease I'm actually pulling off of the bacon as I bake it in the oven. But yeah, so here we are, 5 pounds of bacon, and we have 2 pints or a full quart of bacon grease. So that's pretty terrific. All right, so the canning process is going to be simple. You're either going to, well, first of all, you're going to wipe your rims and place your lids in your flats, or your flats and your rings. And then you're either going to PC these, pressure can these for 75 minutes, or you can hot water bath them for 3 hours. And when I get my canner set up, I'm going to show those of you that water bath, I'm going to show you how I water bath things like this. Now, there is a pound of meat in each one of these jars, but because there's so much air, these jars will want to float. Even though there is a full pound of meat in here, they're going to want to be buoyant. When you're covering them with water, they're going to want to float. And so I want to show all of you that water bath. I want to show you how you can keep these submerged under 2 inches of water for your entire 3-hour process time. But those that are doing PC, this is a simple 75-minute meat, 75-minute process time in your pressure canner. All right, so when I get the canner all set up, I will come back and we will continue. All right, so I am done baking all of my bacon. And just as another little bonus tip, if, like me, you want to use tin foil on your cookie sheet or baking sheet to bake your bacon, I suggest very, very much that you remove this tin foil while the pan is still warm or hot, okay? If you allow this to sit and cool off, sometimes bacon grease gets underneath it and it burns and it turns into glue, and it is very, very difficult to remove the tin foil. So I always remove my tin foil while the pan is still hot or at least warm, just for ease of removal. So that's just another little tip for you. All right, be back in a second. All right, so I got all of my bacon baked in the oven and I drained off as much grease as I could, and then I rolled it all up in my parchment paper and I placed it all in my jars. Now we are not adding water at all inside these jars. It's just the bacon and the parchment paper and rolls. There's no fluid going on inside these jars at all. So then you wipe your rim, which I've already done, and you place your flat lid and your ring, and you can either hot water bath this or you can pressure can it. Now, like I mentioned, hot water bath for these would be 3 hours. Pressure canning for pints of bacon, pressure canning requires 75 minutes. But I said that I was going to tell those of you that do hot water bathing, I'm going to give you a little tip just from my own experience of hot water bathing items that aren't full of fluid. So my bacon is a prime example. And if you are dry packing things like potatoes or carrots or green beans, you pack your jar as densely as you can. But because you're not filling the jar then with fluid after you've packed your food item in there, there's a lot of air in the jar. And if you are submerging your jars under, 2 inches of water over the top of them, because there's so much air inside that jar, the jars are buoyant and they want to float all over in the water. And so what you need to do is you need to anchor and hold them down underneath the surface of the water for the entire 3-hour period. So I want to show you my little trick on how to do that, okay? And you can see that, yes, I have my pressure canner here, but let's just pretend that this is a stock pot or your hot water bath canner. You can also hot water bath in a pressure canner. You know, a 3-hour period of time, you wouldn't steam can that, but you can hot water bath by submerging your jars in water. But none of that is the point. The point is that I want to show those of you who only hot water bath a little trick that I have come up with on how to do buoyant jars like this one that is not filled inside with water and they like to float and bob around. I want to show you what I do. All right, so let's just pretend that this is my hot water bath canner here. And I have placed all of my jars. Let me see if I can get the camera just a little bit closer. And we will aim it down. Yep, there we go. Right into the canner. Okay, so you can see that, number one, my canner has no water in it at this point in time, okay? So you place your filled jars, your buoyant filled jars, if you're doing a dry packed vegetable, or like me today, if you're doing bacon. And you place those in your canner. And then, if you happen to have any kind of an extra rack that fits inside of your canner, I want you to place that on top of your jars. So we have no water in the canner yet. We just have our jars of food, and then we're placing a rack on top of it, okay? And if you don't have an extra rack, you can take a dinner plate and put a dinner plate down, upside down, on top of your jars. What you're going to do for hot water bathing is, because those jars want to float, you need to hold them down under the surface of the water, okay? And this is how I do mine. And I do, honestly, I've used a plate before, I've used a dinner plate before, but I do actually prefer some sort of a rack that allows the water to flow through it very easily. With a, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera there. With a dinner plate, it's one solid piece. And number one, you have to find one that fits in whatever pot or hot water bath canner you are using. And so you need to find one that's big enough that holds your jars down, but it's not so big that it doesn't fit down inside of the pot. But another reason why I like racks is because during a 3-hour hot water bath period, you need to consistently top up your canner, you know, because hot water bathing, your water evaporates, and you need to add more hot boiling water. And when you have a dinner plate, because it's a solid surface, most of the time you only have that edge to get the water around down into your canner. And yes, there's going to be water over the top of it too. But when you pour that boiling hot water in there, a lot of times it kind of splashes and does all sorts of funny stuff. And so this is why I personally, when I am hot water bathing for long periods of time, like with meat or vegetables, for a 3-hour canning period, I really prefer to use some sort of a rack. And you can come up with your own rack. I went and in the baking section, they have round cookie cooling racks. I found out a couple of those fit into my canner. So look there. And another thing that we have done, now this is the bottom, of course, to a Presto pressure canner. And I have many Presto pressure canners, and so I do have a few extra ones of these. So that's what I use sometimes when I'm hot water bathing. But along with the baking aisle, I want to show you that we went, no, it was just our local Fleet Farm. And Fleet Farm is kind of a farm and home type place. You can buy all sorts of things there. It's kind of a variety store, you know, building materials and, you know, feed for your animals and stock and, you know, clothing and all those different things. Well, anyway, Fleet Farm had a wonderful barbecue grill section here a couple of years ago. And this actually that I'm holding in my hands was a replacement grill for a barbecue grill. And all my husband did is that he just took and he cut it to fit inside of my canners. And then he just bent the little sharp edges over with, oh, I don't know how he bent it, but probably some sort of a pliers of some sort, and bent it over. Some of them he just cut straight off like this, but he did make little feet on there for me in case I wanted to use it in the bottom of my canner and I wanted it lifted up off the bottom of the canner. But you can do whatever you want to do. But anyway, we purchased this, I think it was around $10 about 2 or 3 years ago. And as you can see, I use this thing all the time in my canners to double stack. This thing has really held up really well. So this was just from the grilling area in a fleet farm, you know, Menards and Lowe's, any building center or any place that sells barbecue grill replacement parts should have something like this. So let's get to the point. The point is we are going to hot water bath a jar that wants to float, and we want to be able to hold them down. So I start with no water in my canner. I put all of my jars in there, and then I place a rack or a plate on top of it to hold them down. And then what I do is I take quart jars filled with water, no tops on them. I'm not canning them. I am using them as weight, okay? So then I take these quart jars and I place them on top of my full jars. And now I have completely anchored and weighted down all of my jars that want to float. I've anchored them down into place, and I'm not going to have any problems. So then what I do is I come along and I fill my canner. After my jars have been anchored in place, that's when I fill my canner to 2 inches above the top of the jars that are being weighted down. And you're not going to have any floating around. You're not going to have any bobbing. You're not going to have any issues at all because you have those jars in place. They're not going to move, and you have them weighted down with water on top, okay? This is honestly the easiest way I have ever found to do an extended period of hot water bath canning with jars that want to bounce and float around. This just works like a gem. So there you go. Then you go ahead and you proceed with your 3-hour hot water bath period. You have boiling water ready at all times, and you can just add that to your canner at any time that you need to, and you don't have to worry about anything. So that's just a little tip for all of you that do hot water bath items like meat for a long period of time. Now, since I have my my pressure canner today, I'm not going to hot water bath these today. I have hot water bath these before, but I'm going to pressure can today. So in my pressure can, and you saw my gallon container, it was full to about here. I've got about 3 quarts of water, and I have a little bit of cream of tartar in there. I'm just going to start my pressure canning period, and I'm not going to walk you all through that again today because I have walked you through the pressure canning method and what I do. I've walked you through that quite a few times. So I will just leave you at this point in time with pressure can your pints of bacon for 75 minutes. Bring it to a vent for 10 minutes, and then place your weight. Bring it up to the weight that is appropriate for your personal altitude and keep it at that weight for 75 minutes. Then allow your canner to cool naturally. Crack that lid after all the pressure has come down and your emergency blow-off valve is down and your lid lock pressure valve is fallen on its own. Then you crack that lid open and just put it off to the side just a titch for about another 10 or 15 minutes before then you can safely remove those jars from the canner. So right now I'm going to start my canning process, and I will show you what the results are when they are done. So I'll be back in a while. All right, so it has been about 24 hours and all of my jars sealed. And I told you I was going to come back and show you what this is like after canning. So I'm going to page the camera down here for you so that you can see. This is how it looks after it's canned. And the amount of grease that you will have in the bottom of your jar really depends fully on how much grease you render out of that bacon before you wrap it up in your parchment paper and can it. And so, you know, this must have been stuff that I didn't cook quite as long or whatever because there's a little bit of grease in the bottom of the jar, as you can see. But that is not an issue at all. Oftentimes you have grease in your jar. It's not an issue. All right, so I have opened a jar so that you can see what the bacon actually looks like after it is done. And hopefully I have this camera aimed well. I'm just going to unroll this right here on my cutting board. And this is still a little fluidy because, you know, it hasn't solidified completely yet. It's been warm enough in the kitchen. But here is my canned bacon. Now you can see that it does actually stay fairly whole, okay? It stays pretty well put together. I've got some that's crumbly because I think I threw some really cooked ones in with some not so cooked one in. But it does stay in a way or in a fashion that you could take these strips and you could actually just crisp them up in a pan if you wanted. Mostly what I personally use our bacon for is I use it in dishes. And so, you know, if I'm making an omelet or a casserole that I want some bacon in, I'll take my canned bacon and I just unwrap it and literally just tear it into bite-sized pieces. And this is mostly how I use my canned bacon. But you could definitely use this in a lettuce bacon tomato sandwich. You could use this as a side, you know, your breakfast meat along with some eggs. It's very doable and it's very usable. And so then you would just be warming this up either in your microwave or in a fry pan for just a minute or two because it is completely cooked. So that is what the bacon looks like after it has been canned. And then one more tip that I want to give you is that bacon grease that you will find some in your jar. Make sure that you, you know, if you're a person that uses that, don't get rid of that. Just collect that in your refrigerator. But another little tip that I want to give you is that this parchment paper. This parchment paper has a whole bunch of good bacon grease on it. And so I will take this parchment paper and I will actually rub it onto my pans. Now, I've got like my cast iron pan here. And so what I will do is I will just take and I will use that parchment paper and rub that bacon grease into my cast iron pan to help season and seal it. So, like I said, everything goes to a use in our kitchen. Don't waste the little stuff. Look at how nicely that greased up that pan. And that was just the small amount of grease that was on this parchment paper. And it just does a fantastic job of sealing your cast iron dishes up, okay? So those are pretty much, I think, everything that I can think of. I guess another application that I use canned bacon for is in soups. And two of our favorite ones to put bacon in, one of them is cream of asparagus soup, and the other one is cream of broccoli soup. And I always use my canned bacon. I just crumble it up into those bits like that and throw it into those creamy soup type things. I also use this in scallop potato dishes and au gratin potato dishes. It's always wonderful to have a touch of bacon. And what I think is so great about having canned bacon on hand is, number one, it's fully cooked. Number two, it's just ready to use immediately. So you're not stuck thinking, oh, I need bacon, going to the freezer, taking it out, having to defrost it, having to cook it, then cleaning up that whole cooking mess that you've made. You just pop open a jar of canned bacon and bingo, you're done. It's ready to go. Beautiful stuff. One of my favorite things, honestly, to have on our shelves. I've got a lot of favorite things. I know I tell you, well, this is my favorite and that's my favorite. I have a lot of favorite things, but this really is one of my favorites too. So anyway, I hope that you found all of this information useful. I really appreciate you spending your time with me again. God bless everybody and happy canning.